Imagine, if you will, that you were standing in a rather sleek, glass-walled boardroom.
Right, a very modern corporate setting.
Precisely. And the chief executive of, say, a multinational corporation leans across the table, visibly frustrated by a proposed merger.
The tension is palpable, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely. And he declares with great authority that the board is preparing to trade the company's future for a mess of pottage.
Ah, a classic phrase.
It is a thoroughly modern, high-stakes negotiation. Yet, without perhaps realizing it, that executive has just bypassed centuries of sophisticated financial jargon.
Indeed.
He has chosen to hurl a 3,000-year-old insult about a bowl of red lentil stew.
It is a rather stunning temporal dislocation when one pauses to consider it.
It really is.
We navigate our highly digitized 21st century lives using the coordinates of a very ancient agrarian world.
And that invisible architecture is exactly what we are excavating today. Welcome to our deep dive.
It's brilliant to be here.
I am absolutely thrilled to have you listening today because our mission is to embark upon a most fascinating archaeological dig, right into your own mouth.
A lexical autopsy, if you will.
Spot on. We have a compelling stack of source material before us concerning one of the most foundational texts in the history of Western civilization. I am talking about the Bible.
A text that casts a rather long shadow over the English language.
It does. But let me set the parameters immediately for you, the listener. Whether you happen to be deeply devout, staunchly secular, or anywhere in between, our endeavor today is decidedly not theological.
No, not at all. We are putting theology to one side entirely.
Quite so. We are looking at this text, specifically the 400-year-old King James translation, purely as a linguistic blueprint.
Which is, to my mind, the most objective way to assess its legacy.
Right.
We are treating it as a vast open-source lexicon that fundamentally rewired the English tongue.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our promise to you, listening at home or on your commute, is that by the end of our time today, you will realize that your daily casual conversation is utterly saturated with ancient Hebrew and Greek idioms.
You were speaking antiquity, really, without even noticing the dust.
Brilliant way to put it. So let us cast our minds back 4 centuries to the year 1611. We are in Jacobean England.
A fascinating era for language.
It was. The English language at this point is magnificent, but it is highly fluid. It has not yet been locked down by rigid dictionaries or Victorian grammarians, has it?
Not at all. The fluidity of the language at that moment simply cannot be overstated.
Right.
English was, in a sense, a remarkably porous vessel. It was quite ready to absorb new influences.
But to understand how this specific translation achieved such total linguistic dominance, we must examine the political friction of King James's court.
We must indeed. When James ascended the throne, he was confronted by a deeply fractured religious landscape.
You had the Puritans on one side, demanding radical reform.
Precisely. And on the other, you had the highly conservative Church of England hierarchy.
A political tinderbox, essentially.
Quite. So the King James translation was commissioned in 1604, not merely as an academic exercise.
No, it was an act of supreme political statecraft, wasn't it?
It was. James needed a single unifying text to bind his fractured kingdom together.
And he convened a committee of the era's finest scholars to do the job.
He did, but the instruction given to them was not to be wildly creative.
Right.
The mandate was to be deeply, deliberately conservative.
Now, I am fascinated by this concept of a conservative translation.
How so?
Well, I often think of translation as a form of adaptation. You take a concept from one culture and find its natural equivalent in another.
A localization, in modern terms?
Exactly. But the source material notes that these scholars took an entirely different route. They opted for an uncompromising, strict literalism.
They did, and this is the great paradox of the work, actually. When these scholars sat down with the original Hebrew and Greek texts, they possessed the literary skill to smooth out those ancient idioms.
They could have paraphrased them into the comfortable, natural-sounding English of the early 1600s.
They absolutely could have. But out of an intense reverence for the sacredness of the original words, and I should add, relying heavily on the magnificent earlier work of William Tyndale, they chose to translate almost word for word.
So they deliberately preserved the alien syntax of the ancient Near East.
Spot on.
Uh-huh.
They forced English to stretch and contort to fit the ancient world.
Rather than adapting the ancient world to fit English.
Precisely.
It reminds me of the way modern internet culture forces new phrasing upon us today.
Oh, that's an interesting comparison.
Well, you look at words like doom scrolling or ghosting.
Right.
These begin as hyper-niche, slightly awkward online concepts. And suddenly they are fundamentally altering how we describe human behavior offline.
They bleed into the real world.
Exactly. The King James translators were doing something similar, but with a highly complex, incompatible open source code from an ancient operating system.
A rather brilliant analogy.
They jammed ancient Hebrew directly into the brand new English operating system without adapting the code at all.
And the friction that must have caused in the early days is quite palpable in the text.
Can you give us an example?
Let's take the phrase "to set one's teeth on edge."
Oh, yes.
Today, any speaker knows exactly what that visceral sensation is. It's that dreadful shudder brought on by a scraping noise or a fiercely bitter taste.
Like nails on a chalkboard.
Quite. But prior to 1611, that was a bizarre, entirely foreign construction to an English ear.
Really?
Yes, it is a direct, literal import of a Hebrew idiom from the books of Jeremiah and Ezekiel.
Because in natural 17th century English, one might simply say, it troubled me, or it grated upon me.
Exactly so. By refusing to find an existing, comfortable English equivalent, the translators forced the boundaries of the language to expand.
They demanded that English accommodate the bodily, visceral poetry of ancient Hebrew.
They did, and our sources mention From Strength to Strength as another prime example of this.
Ah, yes. You hear that on news broadcasts today constantly.
Usually to describe a burgeoning business enterprise.
Right. Or a football team stringing together a series of victories. They're going from strength to strength.
Yet, that is raw Hebrew syntax dropped squarely into 17th century England.
And its survival is a testament to the sheer ubiquity of the text, surely.
Absolutely. For centuries, this translation was read aloud from every pulpit in every parish to millions of people weekly.
It was the inescapable background noise of the culture.
It was absorbed orally by everyone, from the illiterate laborer all the way up to literary titans like Charles Dickens and Alfred Tennyson.
So, through sheer unrelenting repetition, these jarring alien literalisms gradually lost their foreignness.
Exactly. They became normalized.
Which brings us to a rather fascinating turning point in our linguistic archaeology. We've seen how this strict literalism acted as a wedge, forcing the grammatical door open.
Right.
But human beings don't merely speak in grammatical formulas, do we? We speak in stories.
We use shorthand to describe complex human tragedies and triumphs.
Precisely. So how did these forced grammatical structures morph into the vivid, emotional shorthand we call idioms?
Well, we must first define what an idiom actually achieves.
Okay.
An idiom is, by its very nature, an act of intense compression.
Compression of meaning, you mean?
Yes. It is a colorful phrase that captures an immensely complicated human dynamic, be it jealousy, desperation, or profound failure, with absolute economy.
Right.
The source text details how the dramatic narratives of the Bible provided a vast reservoir of these experiences,
Inextricably linking our modern vocabulary to the rather extraordinary exploits of ancient figures. Let us trace the lineage of a few of these, because I suspect you, our listener, have casually deployed at least 3 of these idioms in the past month without realizing it.
I dare say they have.
Let us begin with the absolute archetype of human conflict. The first mythological family, Adam and Eve, and their sons.
Cain and Abel.
Yes. We have Cain, the eldest, who, consumed by envy, murders his brother Abel. From this incredibly dark, primal narrative of fratricide, we derive the phrase, to raise Cain.
Now, what's fascinating here is the modern usage of raising Cain typically describes creating a noisy disturbance.
Right, acting in a rowdy manner or protesting vehemently about a parking ticket.
Exactly, but consider the profound dramatic weight being invoked there.
It's massive.
When one says a disgruntled customer is raising Cain in a shop, the language is subtly metaphorically equating a mundane terrestrial argument with the explosive, world-altering anger of the first recorded murder.
It takes the mundane and elevates it to the mythic, doesn't it?
It really does.
And it is a deeply visceral image. We don't say someone is raising Abel, the victim. We specifically invoke the instigator of chaos.
Spot on. We invoke the chaos itself.
Then we have another infamous family dispute from the book of Genesis, the brothers Esau and Jacob.
Which gives us the idiom we touched on at the very beginning of the deep dive.
A mess of pottage.
Yes. The narrative context is absolutely crucial here. In the ancient world, the birthright of the eldest son was not merely a financial inheritance.
It was much more than that.
It was the entire mantle of family leadership and spiritual authority.
Right. And Esau returns from the field completely famished, desperate for immediate sustenance.
Whilst Jacob, the younger brother, is cooking a red lentil stew, the pottage.
And Jacob demands the birthright in exchange for the meal.
And Esau, driven by immediate biological gratification, actually agrees.
He trades his entire long-term legacy for a single, fleeting bowl of soup.
Therefore, a mess of pottage perfectly encapsulates the folly of sacrificing long-term security, dignity, or fundamental value for a trivial short-term gain.
Which is exactly why it remains such a devastating critique in political and financial journalism today.
You see it used constantly in the broadsheets.
Oh, yes. If a government privatizes a vital national asset for a quick cash injection just to balance an annual budget, the opposition will invariably accuse them of selling the nation's future for a mess of pottage.
The phrase does the heavy lifting of a 1,000-word economic critique.
It's brilliantly efficient. Moving slightly further down that same family tree, we encounter the story of Joseph.
Which introduces the idiom of Joseph's coat.
Yes, the patriarch Jacob displays blatant, unwise favoritism by gifting a magnificent coat of many colors to his youngest son.
And this public display of preference incites such murderous envy amongst the older brothers that they throw Joseph into a pit.
They fake his death by dipping the coat in goat's blood and sell him into slavery. It's terribly grim.
It is. In modern parlance, Joseph's coat has come to denote a situation of undeserved calamity or a gift that brings about misfortune.
Now, let me play devil's advocate here for a moment, because this touches on the mechanism of how language evolves over centuries.
Go on.
The story of Joseph is a magnificent tragedy. The coat is essentially a cursed lottery ticket.
A cursed lottery ticket. Yes, I like that.
It's a gift from a parent that directly orchestrates the child's downfall through no fault of their own.
Quite.
But if a modern speaker uses the phrase Joseph's coat or says they escaped disaster by the skin of their teeth, yet has absolutely no knowledge of Joseph's slavery or the afflictions of Job, hasn't the phrase become a dead metaphor?
That is a highly pertinent challenge.
Are we just parroting empty syllables? Does detaching the idiom from the bloodshed cause it to lose its dramatic power?
It is the fate of many idioms to lose their original mooring. I'll grant you that.
Right. When we say we are beating around the bush, we rarely think of medieval boar hunting.
Precisely. However, the phrases born of this specific text often retain what I would call a ghostly moral undertone, even when the explicit narrative is forgotten.
A ghostly moral undertone. I love that phrasing. How so?
Because the phrases themselves were constructed with such visceral, poetic intensity by the translators. Let us take your example from the book of Job.
Escaping by the skin of one's teeth.
Yes. Job is a man subjected to unimaginable cosmic suffering. He loses his wealth, his children, his physical health.
He sits in ashes covered in sores. It's a dreadful image.
It is, and to describe the absolute razor-thin margin of his survival, he declares he has escaped with nothing more than the skin covering his teeth.
Which is a brilliant anatomical absurdity. Teeth possess no skin.
Quite. It is a mathematically invisible margin.
Right.
When someone today says they passed a university examination or avoided a traffic collision by the skin of their teeth, they may not know Job's name.
But the phonetic quality of the phrase, the stark, bony imagery of teeth and skin, still communicates a sense of horrific, overwhelming odds.
Exactly. The drama survives in the sheer linguistic construction of the phrase.
The imagery is so potent it carries the emotion completely independently of the narrative.
We see a very similar theatricality with the phrase, the writing on the wall.
Oh, derived from the book of Daniel, detailing the feast of King Belshazzar.
It is the ultimate tale of hubris, isn't it?
It really is. The king is holding a blasphemous banquet using sacred vessels stolen from the temple in Jerusalem.
And suddenly, a disembodied hand manifests and begins inscribing cryptic, luminous Aramaic words onto the plaster of the palace wall.
It is absolute ancient cinema.
Entirely cinematic, the prophet Daniel is summoned to interpret the inscription,
which foretells the immediate downfall of the king and the division of the Babylonian Empire.
And Belshazzar is slain that very night. Thus, the writing on the wall entered the English language to signal an impending, inevitable disaster.
A disaster that is glaringly obvious to anyone perceptive enough to read the signs.
Quite.
The writing was on the wall for the high street retail sector. It is the great corporate cliché, yet born of literal divine judgment.
It's quite the leap, isn't it?
It is. So we've established how these ancient tragedies provided English with its dramatic vocabulary. But humans require more than just colorful idioms to describe their misfortunes.
We do.
Society requires a vocabulary for behaving. How did this translated text transition from merely providing descriptive metaphors to actively dictating English morality?
Well, this is where we examine the text not as a repository of stories, but as a structural spine for ethical conduct.
The proverbs and the maxims.
Exactly. The mottos drawn from this translation essentially became the secular moral vocabulary of the English-speaking world.
I am genuinely struck by this transition. Why did these specific rules survive?
This is an excellent question.
I mean, Tragoby in England had thousands of secular laws and civic codes that have completely vanished from public memory.
They've been utterly forgotten.
Yet parents today, utterly independent of any religious inclination whatsoever, will repeatedly warn their children that one reaps what one sows.
The longevity of that specific phrase is rooted in its profound agricultural logic drawn from the Epistle to the Galatians.
Right.
It posits a universal law of consequence. Whatever seed a person plants, that exact same harvest will inevitably be gathered.
It is inescapable cause and effect, packaged beautifully.
Packaged beautifully is the crux of the matter, surely.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. I am struggling to understand the mechanism of survival here.
Go on.
Is it solely the unassailable ethical truth of these statements? Or is there a linguistic trick at play? I would argue these proverbs functioned as the 17th century equivalent of viral advertising jingles.
The phonetic mechanics of proverbs. They're deeply underappreciated.
So you agree the rhythm itself is the primary vehicle for the morality.
I do.
Consider the psychology of a child. If a parent issues a blunt authoritarian command, say, you must behave yourself because bad actions lead to bad outcomes.
It creates immediate psychological resistance.
Exactly. It is a lecture. It goes in one ear and out the other. But one reaps what one sows is perfectly balanced. It is practically a poem.
It employs a rhythmic symmetry, often relying on rhetorical devices like chiasmus or parallel structure.
The rhythm acts as a Trojan horse for the morality. It bypasses resistance because it sounds less like a parental command and more like an eternal, unbending law of physics.
The source text supports this linguistic analysis entirely. These proverbs wield a special authority not merely because of their spiritual origin, but because they are fundamentally memorable.
A rhythmic cadence embeds the moral principle directly into the musicality of the mind.
Take phrases counseling endurance, such as, "There is no crown without the cross."
The alliteration of the hard C sounds. Crown, cross. It demands to be remembered.
It speaks to the necessity of suffering before triumph. Or consider the rather stark, fatalistic maxim, man proposes, but God disposes.
That is a fascinating one, particularly in our modern era of hyperproductivity and endless scheduling.
It acknowledges the absolute limits of human agency.
We draft our grand designs, we propose our meticulous schedules.
But ultimate outcomes are decided by forces beyond our control, be they divine, economic, or natural.
It is an ancient antidote to modern hubris.
It is indeed.
And it extends to our understanding of human relationships and psychology. We use phrases like blood is thicker than water to navigate familial loyalty.
Or consider the profound psychosomatic observation. A joyful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones.
Which is a remarkably astute piece of ancient medical observation.
It recognizes the inextricable link between mental state and physical well-being, long before the advent of modern psychology.
And the King James translators rendered these truths with such poetic economy that they became the default setting for English wisdom.
Quite.
But the rhythm of these phrases isn't the only thing that became permanently lodged in the architecture of the language.
No, it's not.
As we dig deeper into our lexical autopsy, we discover that this strict literal translation process didn't just give us proverbs.
It gave us so much more.
It froze certain archaic words in amber, acting as a preservative, and delightfully, it birthed entirely new vocabulary through sheer unadulterated misunderstanding.
The contribution to the English lexicon is vast and multifaceted. Let us begin with character traits.
Okay.
The names of specific biblical figures have evolved into the ultimate shorthand for human qualities. They function almost as adjectives now.
Right, so if a colleague navigates a particularly fraught negotiation with immense skill, we don't merely say they are clever.
We say they possess the wisdom of Solomon.
Referring, of course, to the ancient king renowned for his unparalleled sagacity It is the absolute highest compliment one can bestow upon another's judgment.
We do the exact same thing with leadership.
Ah, Moses.
Yes. Moses, the liberator who led the Israelites out of Egyptian bondage and received the law on Mount Sinai, has become the archetype for any great lawgiver.
Or any visionary leader guiding people through a wilderness.
Exactly. And we use names to signify age as well.
If a piece of technology or a social custom is dreadfully outdated, we say it is as old as Adam.
Invoking the first man formed from clay in the Genesis narrative.
Or, to return to our long-suffering friend Job, to endure an interminable delay with saintly forbearance is to have the patience of Job.
This naming convention allows English speakers to convey thousands of words of complex psychological and historical profiling with a single two-syllable proper noun.
It is fiercely efficient. And this expansive naming convention bleeds heavily into our use of metaphor, does it not?
Immensely so. The historical events detailed in the text have provided the scaffolding for how we describe modern chaos and modern diplomacy.
Consider the Tower of Babel.
The Genesis narrative describes an ambitious ancient populace attempting to build a tower to the heavens.
And their hubris is punished by the sudden, confounding confusion of their language.
They can no longer understand one another, and the project collapses entirely.
Today, a Tower of Babel denotes any scene of chaotic misunderstanding, linguistic disorder, or the catastrophic failure of communication.
It is brilliant shorthand.
I am particularly fond of the fig leaf myself.
Ah, yes. Following the illicit consumption of the forbidden fruit, Adam and Eve attempt to cover their sudden, shameful awareness of their nakedness by hastily sewing together fig leaves.
In modern political or corporate discourse, a fig leaf is the perfect derisive metaphor for a thoroughly inadequate attempt to conceal an embarrassment.
Or a scandalous wrongdoing.
Exactly. You read editorials stating, the committee's new ethics policy is merely a fig leaf to cover a decade of institutional corruption.
It is deeply woven into our critical thinking.
It really is.
Conversely, the dove returning to Noah's Ark bearing an olive leaf has provided us with the olive branch,
which stands today as the universal, entirely secular symbol for extending an offer of peace or reconciliation.
But beyond nouns and metaphors, we must examine how the King James Bible affected the very grammar of English. We spoke earlier of it acting as a linguistic preservative.
I am so intrigued by this concept. How exactly does a book act as a preservative for grammar?
Well, when the translation was published in 1611, the scholars deliberately retained words and forms that were already beginning to sound slightly archaic.
Archaic even on the streets of early 17th century London.
Yes, exactly. Words like damsel for a young woman, raiment for clothing, or firmament for the sky.
So they were already going out of fashion.
They were. But by locking these fading words into a monumental, widely read, state-sanctioned text, they effectively halted their extinction.
They kept them alive in a state of suspended animation.
Precisely. They survived in formal, literary, and religious contexts long after they had vanished from the taverns and marketplaces.
That's fascinating.
This preservative effect is most clearly seen in the pronouns. The King James Bible popularized and sustained the use of thou, thee, and thy for the second person singular.
Right.
It also preserved the old verbs ending in thaphalav, the myth goeth.
But surely people weren't walking around Victorian London saying, thou goeth to the shops.
No, they were not. But what is remarkable is that these forms gained an entirely second life in 19th century literature.
Ah, the Romantic poets.
Exactly. Poets and novelists resurrected the thou and the suffixes specifically to lend an elevated, solemn, almost prophetic tone to their entirely secular work.
So the grammatical quirks of the King James Bible essentially became the default sonic register for high art in the English language.
They did.
So we have the preservation of the Old English, but we also have the importation of the utterly foreign, which resulted in some rather spectacular linguistic collisions.
We touched on the literalism of setting one's teeth on edge.
Right.
The source text provides further examples of this structural importation, such as the land of the living and, perhaps most notably, Heart of Hearts.
Heart of Hearts. I confess I use that phrase frequently to describe my deepest, most private convictions.
In my heart of hearts, I knew it was a mistake.
Exactly. But how is that an imported structure?
Well, to understand Heart of Hearts, we must look at how ancient Hebrew managed superlatives.
Okay.
In English, if we want to express the ultimate or extreme version of something, we typically add a suffix, like est.
The deepest heart, the highest king, the holiest place.
We modify the adjective.
Right.
Ancient Hebrew did not employ suffixes in that manner. To express the absolute ultimate version of a noun, they utilized a grammatical form known as the construct state.
Which means what exactly?
It essentially meant repeating the noun. Thus, the ultimate king is the King of Kings.
Oh, wow. The most sacred sanctuary is the Holy of Holies.
Exactly.
Ah. So the translators, clinging to their strict literalism, refused to translate the concept as the deepest heart.
They transposed the Hebrew grammatical rule directly into English, giving us heart of hearts.
They forced an entirely alien mathematical formula for language into the English consciousness, and we simply accepted it because it sounded so profound.
We did.
That is utterly fascinating. It is a grammatical transplant that the host body accepted beautifully.
It's a rather lovely way to frame it.
But my absolute favorite finding in this entire lexical autopsy, the detail that brings me tremendous joy, is not a brilliant translation. No. It's the creation of a brand new word through a spectacular mistake. Let's discuss the birth of the word helpmate.
It is a sobering tale for any linguistic purist, I must say.
It really is. The word helpmate, meaning a helpful companion or partner, usually a spouse, is a complete illusion.
It was born of a fundamental misunderstanding of the biblical text.
Walk us through the anatomy of this error, would you?
Gladly. In the original 1611 English translation of Genesis, God observes Adam's isolation and decides to create a companion for him.
Right.
The text reads, "I will make him an helpmeet for him."
And in early 17th century English, meet was commonly used as an adjective meaning suitable, fit, or proper.
It is meet and right so to do.
Exactly. So the phrase simply meant a helper suitable for him. The noun is help, the adjective is meet.
However, as the text was read aloud over generations, auditory transmission began to blur the lines.
People heard the two distinct words help and meet run together.
Through a process known as folk etymology, listeners assumed it was a single compound noun.
They logically deduced that it must mean a mate who helps.
They smushed it together, applied their own logic, and voila.
Helpmate. An entirely new noun is conjured out of thin air via a typographical or auditory error.
It's quite brilliant in a chaotic sort of way.
It forces one to ponder how much of our proper, highly educated, fiercely defended language is actually just a historically enshrined mistake that society collectively agreed to shrug and go along with.
It demonstrates beautifully that language is not a sterile mathematical system dictated from a mountaintop.
No, it is a messy, breathing, living organism.
And sometimes a collective misunderstanding is so conceptually useful to the speakers that it becomes the new standard. The error outlives the original intent.
And speaking of messy, lived language, we mustn't forget the oaths. The casual exclamations that pepper our speech when we stub a toe or drop a glass.
Spoken English is utterly rife with mild oaths born of biblical reverence. By God, my God, heaven forbid, for God's sake.
But if we dig back a few centuries, the older contractions reveal how deeply biblical imagery saturated even the most profane moments of daily life.
We see this in Shakespeare and the plays of the era. The word zounds.
It sounds to a modern ear like a rather comic book exclamation, almost whimsical.
Yet zounds was a fiercely blasphemous contraction of God's wounds, referring to the crucifixion.
Wow.
Similarly, the exclamation "steth" was a rapid contraction of God's death.
And struth was God's truth.
It reflects a society where the theological narrative was so pervasive that it provided the vocabulary for anger, shock, and pain.
So this foundational text has given us our dramatic idioms, our rhythmic moral framework, our archaic poetry, and our very swear words.
It's a comprehensive influence.
But as we pull back the lens to look at the broader impact, we see that this pervasive naming convention didn't stop at nouns and verbs.
No, it did not.
It stepped off the page and fundamentally mapped the physical world and the people living within it.
This is a profound shift. This is where the text imposes itself upon geography and human identity.
For centuries, Western parents have overwhelmingly favored biblical names for their children.
The list is practically a roll call of the English-speaking world.
The source material notes a vast array. For boys, we have John, James, Peter, Andrew, Thomas, Adam, Abraham, David, Joseph.
And for girls, Mary, Sarah, Elizabeth, Rebecca, Rachel.
The ubiquity of these names is not a mere accident of fashion, is it?
Not at all. As the source material explicitly notes, historically, these names were chosen with the profound belief that they carried blessings of peace, virtue, and divine favor.
To name a son David after the giant-slain king, or a daughter Mary after the mother of Christ, was an act of parental hope.
It was a desire that the child would embody the strength, wisdom, or faithfulness of their namesake.
Which introduces an element of nominative determinism, really.
It does.
Does bestowing a name like Solomon, laden with centuries of cultural expectation regarding unassailable wisdom, subtly alter the societal pressures placed upon a child?
Even in our heavily secular modern age, a name is the first story told about a person.
When that name carries thousands of years of narrative weight, it inevitably brings a certain cultural gravity with it.
It is highly probable that the psychological weight of the name shapes the individual's experience within the culture.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, it is not merely individuals who were named.
No, the text mapped itself onto the very land.
English speakers turned ancient, literal geography into a metaphorical landscape for navigating the modern world.
We superimposed the ancient map onto our own terrain.
Consider the city of Jerusalem.
Historically, it is a very real ancient city in the Levant.
But within the English language, Jerusalem has evolved to evoke any cherished, holy, or ultimate destination.
William Blake's poem, asking if a new Jerusalem can be built in England's green and pleasant land, perfectly captures this.
He is not talking about Middle Eastern architecture. He is talking about a utopian ideal.
And we do the exact same with the Garden of Eden.
It transitions from a mythological location in the book of Genesis to a descriptor for any idyllic retreat.
A young couple might look at their first tiny, rather damp flat in the city and lovingly refer to it as their Garden of Eden.
They are projecting a vast ancient narrative of paradise onto a mundane contemporary reality.
It operates as a geographical shorthand, and it works for less savory locations as well.
Ah, yes. The source text notes that dishonest or deceitful individuals are sometimes mockingly told they belong in Crete.
Because of the biblical claim from the Epistle to Titus that Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, lazy gluttons.
It turns an entire Mediterranean island into a permanent shorthand for deceit.
And then there is Jericho, the ancient walled city near the Dead Sea.
To tell someone to go to Jericho or to complain of a journey that stretches from Jericho to June signifies a distant exile.
A dreadful banishment or a terribly prolonged absence.
It is the linguistic equivalent of telling someone today to go and move to Pluto. It is banishment to the absolute furthest, most desolate edge of the known map.
It is a highly effective analogy. By utilizing these place names, Eden, Babylon, Jericho, Jerusalem English speakers have mapped a spiritual ancient geography over top of their physical world.
It allows them to navigate the moral and emotional dimensions of their daily lives using the coordinates of antiquity.
It's quite a legacy.
Which brings us to a remarkable crossroads in our deep dive today. Let us take a moment to survey the terrain we have covered.
We've covered quite a bit of ground.
We began by observing a committee of conservative scholars sitting in drafty rooms 400 years ago, clinging stubbornly to a policy of strict literal translation.
And from that singular decision, we have traced the creation of dramatic idioms like raising Cain and trading for a mess of pottage.
We have seen how the rhythmic, phonetic balance of Proverbs turned ancient ethics into inescapable moral jingles.
We have uncovered grammatical quirks preserved in amber.
Outright mistakes like helpmate.
And the geographical metaphors that define the quintessential English tongue today.
So what does this all mean?
What it means is that we possess a linguistic inheritance of unimaginable, densely layered richness.
And the most compelling aspect of this, as noted in the conclusion of our source text, is the effortless modern legacy of these phrases.
Today, biblical literacy, the actual reading and studying of the primary text, has significantly, precipitously declined in the general populace.
Yet the linguistic legacy endures without the slightest friction.
That is the ultimate proof of its integration, isn't it? The phrases no longer require the book to survive.
You read the sports pages today, and a football manager will angrily complain in a press conference that journalists are putting words in my mouth.
A fashion writer in London will describe an eccentric, avant-garde celebrity as being a law unto themselves.
The front page of a national broadsheet will declare that a failing retail chain refuses to give up the ghost.
These phrases, begotten in ancient scripture and forged in a Jacobean translation, have passed so seamlessly into the common currency of English that they are used perfectly.
And with utter devastating precision.
By millions of people who may have never once opened the book itself.
The Bible's narrative truth, its moral clarity, and its raw poetic power have furnished the language with an inexhaustible store of imagery.
It is an integral living part of the English tongue, functioning entirely independently of its religious origins.
It is the invisible scaffolding we spoke of at the very beginning of our journey. The architecture holds firm even if the original builders, and indeed the original blueprints, have been largely forgotten by the inhabitants.
Quite so.
Which leaves me with a final, rather provocative thought for you to ponder as we conclude our deep dive today.
I look forward to it.
If the English language owes its tremendous poetic richness, its visceral dramatic idioms, and its shared metaphorical framework to the pervasive influence of this single foundational text,
Yes.
what happens to the evolution of the language now that this text is no longer universally read?
Ah.
As our shared literary foundations inevitably fragment in the digital age, where we all consume entirely different media in our own highly curated algorithmic silos, will our shared language become poorer, more fractured, and relentlessly literal?
It's a genuine concern.
Or are we, at this very moment, unknowingly crowdsourcing a new invisible text pulled from the internet, from global cinema, from the chaotic churn of social media, that will quietly construct the new hidden architecture of the English language for the next 400 years?
It is a formidable question. Language, as we have seen today, abhors a vacuum and never stops moving. It merely seeks out a new conduit to carry its stories forward.
Indeed it does. Thank you for joining us on this extensive exploration of the hidden histories lurking beneath our daily speech.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
It has been a marvelous journey. Until next time, we wish you a splendid day, and do keep a careful ear on the words you choose to speak. Farewell.